The Dark Scrolls. She was never meant to be a child, not in the way children should be. Wild, laughing, smeared with fruit juice and dirt, running barefoot across fields. From the very moment of her birth, Margarita Teresa was already a promise, a negotiation, a sealed fate between bloodlines that had long forgotten how to love. She entered the world not as someone to be cherished, but as an answer to a question that should never have been asked. How far can a dynasty go to preserve its own blood before that very blood begins to eat itself alive? The girl was born in 1651 in the thick-stoned, echoing chambers of the Spanish royal court, surrounded by whispers and candlelight, and a legacy so tangled in incest it could barely walk upright. Her parents, Emperor Ferdinand III and Maria Anna of Spain, were uncle and niece. Their union, like so many in the Habsburg family, was not forged out of affection or desire, but out of fear. The kind of fear that drives men to clutch their bloodlines like relics, even as those lines begin to rot. By the time Margarita cried her first breath, her blood was already a labyrinth, looping back upon itself in ways no soul should carry. To the outside world she was a miracle, so beautiful, so composed with her fair skin, large eyes, and golden curls sculpted by the brush of court painters like Velázquez. But those portraits, however luminous, lied. They did not show the fragility of her bones, the faint tremors in her hands, the way her face, so sweet and doll-like, was sculpted by generations of shared DNA until it became both perfect and grotesque. They painted her as a divine ornament, the centerpiece of a crumbling empire, but never the prisoner that she truly was. Her earliest memories were not of lullabies or the warmth of her mother's arms. They were of silence, formal meals where children were seen but not heard, and long, breathless hours of sitting still while being measured, dressed, observed. She was rarely allowed to play with other children. Most of them had died. Stillbirths, deformities, whispered scandals erased before they could be inked in history books. Those who survived were often so delicate that the mere act of laughing too hard could send them into coughing fits for days. Margarita learned young that her body was not hers. Every cough drew panic. Every flush in her cheek sent physicians rushing, not with concern for her comfort, but for what she represented, a vessel, a contract, a future womb. By age 3, her marriage was being discussed in whispers behind heavy doors. By age 5, it was decided she would be wed to her uncle, the already disfigured and mentally deteriorating Leopold Wurst. She was not old enough to understand the weight of what that meant, but she was old enough to know the eyes on her changed when they spoke of it, not with love, but calculation. She was taught to curtsy before she could walk. Her tutors drilled her in languages, music, manners, the Catholic catechism. But never once was she taught freedom. She did not know what it was to say no. Her dolls were dressed in royal garments. Even in play, she practiced queenship. Her childhood was a performance, and the audience never left the room. She was a little girl built to uphold centuries of blood-drenched pride, and she bore it the only way she knew how, with silence and a soft, haunted smile. Her father died when she was just 6. They said the angels took him. Margarita wondered if the angels had ever met him, if they knew how much he had loved the empire more than his own child. After his death, she became the centerpiece of her mother's ambition. Maria Anna, now widowed and regent, understood the stakes better than anyone. She pushed Margarita harder, polished her like porcelain, showed her off like a living heirloom. Even her illnesses were managed as court events, masked, hidden, soothed with imported tonics, but never truly healed. Because to be truly healed, one must first be seen as human. The court adored her, or at least the image of her. When Velázquez painted Las Meninas, it wasn't just a portrait. It was propaganda. Margarita at the center, glowing, delicate, surrounded by dwarfs, maids, and artists, everyone orbiting her like she was the sun. But the real girl was not golden. She was tired. Her back ached from corsets. Her skin flared in rashes from lace that cut like wire. She woke from dreams where she was drowning in veils. Every smile she gave in public was learned, rehearsed, and mandatory. She tried to rebel once. It was small. She refused a lesson, a music rehearsal. Her mother slapped her hard across the cheek. The silence that followed was heavier than the blow. It was not rage, it was fear. Maria Anna knew her daughter could not afford to crack. If Margarita broke, the empire broke. And the empire would not allow that. From then on, Margarita learned to fold herself smaller and smaller until she became exactly what they needed. A girl with no corners, no thorns, no voice. By the age of 10, she had begun to write letters to Leopold, her uncle and future husband. The letters were stiff, dictated by her governess, and full of hollow praise. "I hope you are in good health," she wrote. "I look forward to the day I may serve you as a loyal and humble wife." Her hand trembled as she wrote the last words. Somewhere inside, she understood she was not writing to a man, but to a specter, to the monster that awaited her on the other side of girlhood, a man whose body bore the same twisted blood as hers, but even more disfigured, more broken. Their union was not love, it was arithmetic, it was destiny calculated in chromosomes. But she held on to small things, a pet monkey that she loved, a maid who sometimes sang lullabies in secret, the rare moments she could wander the gardens alone and feel sunlight not as a spotlight, but as something warm. These were her rebellions, not loud but necessary. Because deep down, Margarita was still a child, and children, even royal ones, want to be held, not displayed. The older she grew, the more her body betrayed her. Fainting spells, weak limbs, pain that came without warning. Doctors spoke in hushed tones. Her mother waved them away. "She is strong," Maria Anna would insist. "She must be." And so Margarita learned to bear it, to walk with the pain, to smile through the fever, to dance when summoned. Because if she stopped, if she crumbled, she feared they would not mourn her. They would replace her. She was not a daughter. She was a keystone. By the time she turned 13, the preparations for her departure to Vienna began. Her wedding was imminent. Her childhood, such as it was, would end not with celebration, but with exportation. The Spanish court mourned not for her loss of innocence, but for their loss of power. She would now serve Austria. Her bloodline would take root again in another palace. Her body would be handed off like a relic, carefully wrapped in gold and fear. As she stood at the harbor, ready to leave everything she had ever known, she did not cry. She had already wept enough for 10 lifetimes. Instead, she looked out at the sea as gray and endless as her fate, and whispered a single thought. Perhaps, in another life, I would have been free. But there would be no other life. Not for Margarita Teresa, only the one she had been born into, a life forged by incest, gilded by duty, and poisoned by legacy. The ship that carried her toward Vienna was dressed like a floating chapel, gilded wood, velvet-lined cabins, the Virgin Mary etched into the walls of her quarters. But no sanctity could hide what the voyage truly was, a funeral procession for the last of her girlhood. Every wave that struck the hull seemed to peel another layer from her soul, and by the time the ship moored at port, the girl who stepped off was not the same one who had boarded. They said she was lucky. They said she was blessed. They dressed her in silks and pearls and called her Empress-to-be. Yet in every hallway of the Austrian court, Margarita could feel the rot creeping behind the marble. It smelled like incense and blood. It moved in the silence between words, and it stared out from the eyes of her new husband, Leopold Vast First. He was soft-spoken, gentle even, but his kindness was wrapped in a body warped by the same dynasty that had birthed them both. His jaw was slack, his forehead prominent, his mouth perpetually open in a slight grimace that could never fully close. The famous Habsburg jaw, that grotesque family heirloom, was no longer a quirk in him. It was a curse made flesh. His intellect was inconsistent, his health worse. When he spoke, his voice wavered between boy and monarch. And when he looked at her, it was not with affection, but with expectation. They had been born to marry one another. That was the story they were told. The bloodline demanded it, and the bloodline was God. Margarita learned to smile again, but it was thinner this time. She played her part, as always. She greeted the court with demure grace, praised her husband's virtues, knelt for mass with perfect posture. But inside something had begun to crack, not a break, not yet, but a slow, splintering hum behind her ribs. Vienna was colder than Madrid, the palace larger but emptier. Her mother's shadow no longer loomed, but the expectations had not lessened. They had only changed form. She was now empress in training. Her body, still aching from her voyage, was pressed back into its role, to carry an heir, and soon. The wedding night was not violent, but it was cruel in its inevitability. Margarita laid beneath her husband like a saint on a slab, trembling not from pain, but from the awareness that this was her purpose now. There was no room for desire. Their marriage was an equation, their bodies instruments. She did not weep until the room was empty. And when she did, it was not for herself, but for all the versions of her that had been carved away to get here. Weeks turned to months, and with them came a pregnancy. The court rejoiced. The bloodline would continue. Priests sang hymns, bells rang. Margarita, still just 14, could barely walk without assistance. Her legs swelled, her spine curved under the weight of a body not yet ready to be a mother. She vomited endlessly. The doctors said it was normal, a divine trial. But her maids whispered in the shadows, "She is too small, too fragile." The child was born too early. A girl, dead within a day. Margarita was not told at first. They feared the truth would unravel her. When she learned of it, weeks later, it was by accident, an overheard servant, a misplaced letter. She did not scream. She did not faint. She simply stood in front of a window for hours, her hands pressed to the glass as if trying to feel something beyond it. They buried the child without ceremony, too young to be named, too sacred to be mourned. Margarita was given perfumed oils and strict silence. "You will try again," they told her. "You are young, you are strong." But she was neither of those things, not anymore. Her body never truly recovered. Each month was a struggle, bleeding that wouldn't stop, fevers that left her in delirium. Her spine twisted further, her breathing became shallow. Her hair lost its shine, her skin turned pale. But she kept moving, kept attending Mass, kept holding Leopold's arm with a grip so light it was almost spectral. Because if she faltered, if she allowed herself to break, the Empire might finally admit that its most prized treasure was disintegrating from the inside out. And still they made her try again. Another pregnancy, another child. This one lived longer. A boy, but he was weak. His limbs too thin, his cry too soft. They named him Ferdinand Wenceslaus. He died before his first birthday. Again, no ceremony. Again, silence. The loss began to hollow her. Margarita no longer spoke unless prompted. She would sit for hours in front of the fire, staring into it as if it might burn away the ache in her abdomen or the weight in her chest. She wrote letters to her mother, but they were vague, polite, filled with empty phrases. The court is kind. My husband is devoted. God gives me strength. She did not dare write the truth. I am disappearing, and no one notices. But her mother noticed. Maria Anna sent remedies, priests, prayers. She begged her daughter to eat more, to rest, to believe in her duty. Margarita obeyed, but each command felt more like a nail. She was 17 when her third child was born. A girl, Maria Antonia. This one lived. For a time, the court celebrated. Margarita, for the first time in years, allowed herself a flicker of warmth. She held the child close, studied her face, her fingers, her breath. But the warmth was fleeting. Maria Antonia, though alive, bore the same signs: fragility, slowness, a softness that whispered of doom. Margarita knew then that the curse would never lift. The blood was too thick, too broken. It clung to the children like chains. She had not escaped Spain. She had only become its most tragic export. She grew quieter still. Her health waned, the priests came more often, her appetite vanished. By 18, she could barely walk without fainting. Her heart palpitated without warning. Her bones ached like they belonged to someone twice her age. The physicians disagreed on the cause. Some blamed consumption. Others spoke of divine trials. No one mentioned the truth, that her body, built by generations of incest and used as a vessel of imperial continuity, was failing under the weight of its design. Still, she did not break publicly. She held herself upright, lips parted in a small, fixed smile. Her eyes, once wide and golden, dulled like cloudy glass. And yet the court still praised her. Her grace, her devotion, her composure. No one praised her pain. It did not fit the portrait. The days blurred. Her daughter grew slowly. Leopold visited often, but spoke less. He had found comfort in his work, his music, his piety. Margarita found no comfort at all. The gardens she once wandered now seemed like tombs. The palace walls like prison bars. She would sit by the window and watch the snow fall over the city, her breath fogging the glass, her fingers pale and trembling. She once whispered to a maid, "I feel as though I was born dying." The maid said nothing. There was nothing to say by 19. Margarita Teresa of Spain, once the glittering jewel of two empires, was reduced to a ghost in silk. Her body curled in on itself, her lungs struggled, her heart stuttered. The physicians began preparing for her death before she did. They said she was pious until the end, that she accepted God's will, that she smiled when her daughter kissed her forehead. But they do not say what truly passed through her mind in those final hours, whether she felt peace or simply exhaustion, whether she prayed or cursed, whether she forgave the blood that had brought her into this world and torn her apart from within. She died in 1673, 19 years old. They buried her in royal pomp. Her portraits remained in halls across Europe. Her name entered history as a symbol of beauty, diplomacy, and tragic brevity. But those who remember her should remember more than her paintings. They should remember the girl who was born a calculation, lived as a relic, and died a sacrifice to a lineage that loved its name more than its daughters. They mourned her in marble, not in memory. Across the courts of Europe, bells tolled in her name. Black veils were drawn, masses recited, candles lit in great cathedrals under ceilings so high they mocked the smallness of the people below. In Vienna, her death was announced with a cold, official dignity, her name spoken like a lost treasure. In Madrid, her mother wept in private, but even her tears were scheduled, witnessed, filtered through the expectations of queenship. No one dared say aloud what they all knew, that Margarita had never been truly alive in the way life was meant to be lived. She had belonged to everyone but herself. Her daughter, Maria Antonia, barely 3, clutched a doll her mother had once held. She would never remember the scent of Margarita's hair, the way her hands trembled when brushing curls from her child's forehead, or how she sang to her in Spanish when the court had left the room. All of that vanished with her. What remained was a story no one wanted to tell truthfully. They spoke of her piety, her beauty, her grace. They spoke of how she upheld the sacred bond between Spain and Austria, but no one wrote of the way her lungs collapsed slowly in the nights, how her ribs curled in agony, how her youth decayed inside a cage of royal flesh, spun from centuries of repeated blood. They did not write of how her cries, if she ever dared let them loose, were muffled behind tapestries, drowned out by the organ hymns of obligation. What they did write, however, was how she fulfilled her duty, that she had been born to marry her uncle, to carry a child, to smile as she withered, that her death was tragic only in its timing, not in its cause. But history does not carry the weight of breath, nor the ache of bone. It does not tell you how, in her final weeks, she begged the Virgin Mary for release, not salvation, or how she began to dream of running, barefoot, free, her corset cast off, her name forgotten, her body her own. She spoke of it only once to a visiting priest, whispering feverishly between coughs. "I think there is another world," she said, "where girls are born for love, not contracts." He told her to pray. She closed her eyes, not to pray, but to disappear. In her death, the dynasty continued. Maria Antonia grew, married, and bore a child of her own, a son who would become the last Habsburg emperor of Spain. But the bloodline that had taken so much from Margarita was already rotting at its core. Her daughter's body carried the same marks, a delicate constitution, bouts of illness, and the quiet sadness of someone who never quite belonged to herself. And still, the portraits of Margarita endured. Velázquez's brush immortalized her, not as a girl of sorrow and steel, but as an angel in satin. In the grand halls of art, she stands frozen in time, golden-haired, porcelain-skinned, the center of a carefully composed canvas. No one sees the tension in her shoulders. No one hears the silence behind her eyes. But sometimes, if you look too long, you might sense it, the faint outline of something unsaid. A breath caught in the chest of a child who never got to be one. A longing smeared in paint. A life swallowed whole by blood and empire. Because Margarita Teresa of Spain was not a ghost story. She was a girl born to die slowly in the service of a name. And though her body was laid to rest in the imperial crypt beneath Vienna, her casket surrounded by marble effigies and gold, her soul, if it ever escaped the chains of her name, does not lie still. She lingers in the forgotten spaces between history's lies, in the silence of palaces, in the echoes of empty nurseries, in the hearts of girls still born into dynasties that value legacy over life. And if you ever walk the halls of the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna and stand before her portrait, framed in gold, eternal in her infant finery, do not just see the girl, see what was taken from her, and remember her not as an empress or a wife or a daughter of nations, but as the child she never got to be, a brief flame in a room that never allowed fire. And may you mourn her, not for her death, but for everything she was never allowed to live. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.